Step out of the vehicle. Ma'am, hands where I can see them. The voice cut through the roar of rain and traffic, sharp as a blade. A flashlight beam slammed against the driver's window, blinding her. The officer's tone wasn't procedural. It was taunting. Deputy Director. Huh? We've been waiting for you. The words dripped with contempt, the kind only born from power and fear. Dr. Naomi Elise Carter froze for a breath, then exhaled slowly. Her badge, gold and clean, lay on the dashboard under the wiper's steady rhythm. The blue and red lights behind her painted the asphalt like a warning. This wasn't a stop. It was a setup. Before going into this story, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe that truth still matters, subscribe to the channel and give this story a like. Now, let's begin. Rain battered the windshield of the black Chevy Tahoe, every drop echoing against the silence inside. It was past 11, and the city's glow from downtown Atlanta flickered faintly through the storm. Naomi's fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as she saw the patrol SUV tailing her for 3 exits. Her mind ran through the evening's classified meeting. 200 AR-15 rifles missing from airport cargo, each shipment stamped with police clearance. Her task was clear: trace the leak, find who was protecting the smugglers, and stop the operation before the weapons vanished overseas. When the flashing lights finally signaled her to pull over, she already knew whose name she would find on the report: Sergeant Ryan Whitaker, the same officer her husband, FBI agent Marcus Carter, had been investigating before his mysterious death 3 years earlier. She reached for her phone, but the screen was dead. Battery drained hours ago. She didn't panic. She pressed her thumb against her smartwatch instead, activating a silent beacon. One small light blinked twice in the corner of the screen. The signal had gone out. Whitaker stepped from his cruiser with theatrical confidence. His partner, Officer Kyle Dempsey, followed, his movements stiff and uncertain. Both men wore smirks. Whitaker rapped his knuckles on her window. License and registration. Sweetheart, and don't try that federal act on me tonight. The word sweetheart landed like an insult. Naomi rolled the window down halfway. Calm, professional. You're detaining a federal officer. Sergeant, my badge is right there. You can call the DNI hotline to confirm. Whitaker took the badge, let it slip into a puddle, and pressed his boot over it. You think that fancy title makes you untouchable? He sneered. Impersonating a federal agent. 7 years, minimum. His voice carried through the rain. Dempsey's body cam light blinked red, then went dark. He gave a small nod to his superior, unholstered his own recording device, and placed it near Naomi's seatbelt. Its real purpose not to record, but to splice her voice. In 30 seconds, it would create an audio file of her threatening to kill officers. Naomi didn't move. She could smell whiskey on Whitaker's breath, hear the thrill of dominance in every word. Step out, he ordered. Shoes off. Watch off. You don't need those where you're going. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped into the rain, her white blouse clinging to her skin, hair pulled back from her face. She looked him straight in the eye. Ryan Whitaker, she said evenly. You're under investigation for arms trafficking under Federal Protocol Omega-7. His expression flickered for just a second, then hardened again. You've got guts, he said. Too bad you won't live long enough to see how this ends. He turned to Dempsey. Get the cuffs. The younger officer hesitated. Sarge, she's not resisting. Do it, Whitaker snapped. The metal clicked around her wrists. Naomi's smartwatch pulsed once, confirmation that the hidden dash cam in her rearview mirror had gone live. Every second, every word was being encrypted and uploaded to a satellite. Whitaker leaned close, pretending to whisper, but his voice carried. Your husband thought he could expose me too. You know how that ended? The rain muffled the sound of her steady breathing. she whispered back. You just made the same mistake twice. Dempsey towed her vehicle while Whitaker rifled through her briefcase, pulling out sealed folders marked, Eyes Only. He laughed. Top secret. Huh? Maybe I'll keep a few souvenirs? When Naomi said nothing. His laughter grew louder. Nothing to say. Doctor? Not even a threat? He didn't notice the faint glow of her smartwatch camera recording his face, frame by frame. Her phone lay broken on the road, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks. But it had already done its job. Just before it died, she'd set it to sync the dashcam footage with a backup server in D.C. Every frame was already safe. Whitaker shoved her into the back seat of the cruiser. You're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer and making threats against law enforcement, he declared, reading from a script he'd practiced. Dempsey's face was pale, his hands trembling as he started the engine. Where to? He asked quietly. Warehouse 17, Whitaker said. Chief's orders. Naomi turned her head toward the window, the flashing lights reflecting in her eyes. She thought of Marcus, of his final words on that night 3 years ago. If they ever come for you, don't fight them head on. Record everything. She had followed that advice to the letter. The dash cam would speak for her when she could not. As they drove off the highway, she caught a glimpse of a billboard. Freedom Plaza, her husband's old campaign for community policing reform. The irony was almost poetic. Her lips curved slightly. You know, she said softly, this isn't going to end the way you think. Whitaker looked back at her through the mirror. You talk too much. The cruiser turned down a service road, its tires splashing through mud. Dempsey looked uneasy. Sarge, maybe we should just take her to booking. Whitaker's hand shot to his gun. Do you want to end up like Marcus Carter? You do what I say. The younger man swallowed hard and said nothing more. Naomi sat in silence, memorizing every turn, every light. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the brief quiet, she spoke one final sentence. Soft, clear, calm. Protocol Omega-7 confirmed. Whitaker frowned. What did you just say? She smiled faintly. You'll find out soon enough. Miles away, at a federal relay tower in Langley. A red indicator light blinked. Data packet received. A classified protocol had been triggered. An alert reserved for only one purpose. When a high-ranking federal officer was unlawfully detained. Within minutes, the signal would reach the Director of National Intelligence himself. Back on I-85, the cruiser disappeared into the dark, leaving only the sound of tires and thunder fading behind. The trap had been set, but not for the woman they thought they had cornered. The next morning, Room 4B of Fulton County Superior Court smelled of burnt coffee, paper, and sweat. The kind of air that carried tension long before a word was spoken. The case title on the docket read plainly, State of Georgia v. Naomi Elise Carter. But everyone in that room already knew who she was, at least, who they were told she was. A dangerous fraud, a woman pretending to be a federal agent, a threat to law enforcement. None of it true, all of it orchestrated. The bailiff called for order, and the echo of the gavel seemed to slice through her ribs like a knife. Naomi sat still at the defense table, wrists free now, posture calm, her face unreadable. Her only weapon was silence. Sant. Ryan Whitaker strutted into the courtroom as if it were a stage, and the jury his audience. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his badge polished bright. The cameras from local news stations panned across the room, and he adjusted his collar before taking the stand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, with a smile meant to charm. This woman threatened to kill us, said she'd have us dead in 24 hours. She flashed a fake badge, a fancy one, even had a fake number to call. He spoke slowly, deliberately, turning to the jury after every phrase. Behind him, Officer Kyle Dempsey sat slouched, eyes red from a sleepless night. He nodded obediently when prompted, avoiding Naomi's gaze. The prosecutor played the audio Whitaker had fabricated. Naomi's voice echoed across the room, distorted but familiar. "I'll have you all dead in 24 hours. The words hung heavy, and a few jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Whitaker bowed his head slightly, as though reliving trauma. "I feared for my life," he said, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. Dempsey dabbed his dry eyes with a tissue. The public defender assigned to Naomi rose from his chair. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, his briefcase unopened. No questions. He muttered and sat back down. The judge looked confused. "Counselor, you're declining cross-examination." He nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor." Naomi studied him quietly. The man's hands were shaking, but not from fear. He'd already been paid to lose. Judge Margaret Ellison, a woman in her 60s with stern features, tapped her pen against the bench. "Dr. Carter, you have the right to speak on your own behalf." Naomi looked up slowly. "Not yet, Your Honor." Her tone was soft but firm, the kind that carried authority without effort. "I'll let the facts speak first." The judge frowned, but allowed it. The room buzzed with whispers as Naomi returned to her notebook and continued writing in neat, coded shorthand, sentences that, to the untrained eye, looked like random phrases but were actually encrypted messages. Every note she took was being transmitted through the ink to a hidden satellite frequency, one designed for moments exactly like this. Omega 7 was in motion. During recess, Whitaker leaned casually against the hallway wall, greeting officers who came to congratulate him. "She'll be in state prison by Friday," one said, clapping his shoulder. "And I heard the chief's cleaning up the paperwork tonight." Whitaker grinned. "Yeah, once the feds clear her name from their list, she's gone for good." He didn't see the security camera above the water fountain capturing every word. He didn't know that the feed was already being monitored by the Department of Justice in Washington, back inside the courtroom. Naomi's defender pretended to organize his papers but whispered low under his breath. "You don't know who you're up against. Lady, these people own the city." Naomi didn't look at him. "Then they're about to meet the rest of the country," she said evenly. By mid-afternoon, the prosecution rested. The judge announced a brief recess before closing arguments. The jurors filed out, some glancing at Naomi with curiosity, others with suspicion. Whitaker smirked at her from across the room. "Told you not to play federal," he said. "Now you're learning." Naomi's response was measured. "I learn quickly." "Sergeant, you should worry about the test coming next." He chuckled, not realizing she wasn't talking about the trial, downstairs in holding. Naomi was escorted to a small interview room. 2 deputies waited outside, their expressions blank. She sat alone for 5 minutes before the door opened and a young man in a gray suit entered. He didn't speak, just set a folded paper on the table. On it, in simple type, Omega 7 active, federal override pending. Naomi read it once, then burned it with the end of a match pulled from her sleeve. "Thank you," she said softly. The man left without another word. At 4 o'clock, court resumed. The defense presented no witnesses, no cross, no closing argument. The jurors shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Judge Ellison's patience thinned. "Dr. Carter," she said finally, "if you have anything to say before I remand you, now would be the time." Naomi stood, smoothed her suit jacket, and met the judge's eyes. "Only this. Your Honor, truth is patient. It doesn't knock. It enters." She sat down again. The gavel fell, setting the date for sentencing. The bailiff approached. "Ready to escort her out," Whitaker whispered to Dempsey. "Get her paperwork to holding. Chief wants her processed tonight." Dempsey nodded, but his hand trembled as he signed the transfer form. He couldn't shake the image of Naomi's calm eyes under the stormlight the night before. Something about her silence unnerved him. That evening, Naomi sat in her cell, back straight, notebook in her lap. The pages were filled with coordinates, flight numbers, and cargo routes, everything tied to the missing AR-15s. She tapped her pen against the edge of the page 3 times, activating a low-frequency pulse through the ink. Across town, in a federal relay center, her signal appeared on screen. A technician stared. Confused. "Sir, we're receiving a live Omega-7 ping from Atlanta." The supervisor leaned closer. "Who authorized that?" The tech swallowed. "Deputy Director Carter." The man's eyes widened. "Get Langley on the line. Now." Hours later. As the courthouse emptied and the lights dimmed, Dempsey walked to his patrol car alone. He sat behind the wheel. Shaking, he pulled out his phone and stared at a photo of his wife and son. His voice cracked. "I can't do this anymore. Ryan!" But Whitaker's voice over the radio cut him off. "Yes, you can. We're too far in. Just one more day. Kyle. Then you'll have your payout. And she'll be a ghost." The line went dead. Dempsey's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't know it yet, but his next choice would decide which side of history he'd stand on, back in her cell. Naomi closed her eyes and took a slow breath. The sound of rain returned outside, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of the night, somewhere above. Satellites orbited quietly, capturing her every coded word, every silent plan. She had been framed before, betrayed before, but she had never been underestimated like this. She opened her eyes and whispered to no one in particular. Tomorrow, the truth walks in. And when the lights went out, the dash cam and evidence storage continued to upload, unnoticed by the men who thought they'd buried her. The rain had stopped, but Atlanta hadn't rested. The city looked calm, yet every corner hid eyes watching for a name that now carried weight: Naomi Elise Carter. 3 days had passed since her arrest, and in that time, whispers of the fake federal woman spread from precinct halls to courtroom cafeterias. But somewhere inside a Buckhead mansion, beneath the stillness of luxury, a secret waited, one that could shatter the entire web built against her. At 3 a.m, Maya Carter, Naomi's only daughter, stood barefoot in her mother's office, her face pale under the desk lamp. The phone on the mahogany table buzzed again, lighting up the screen with a message. "You have 48 hours. Shut up or die." The words repeated, flickering like static, before disappearing into black. She locked the phone and pressed her trembling hands against the desk, breathing through the fear the way her mother had taught her. Slow, steady, never show weakness. Maya crouched beside the floor panel beneath the desk and pried it open. The safe underneath had been part of her childhood memory, a feature her mother always said was for the boring paperwork. But tonight, when she turned the combination Naomi had once whispered during a thunderstorm, the door swung open to reveal a metal box, smaller than she expected, heavy with secrets. Inside were 3 items: a black encrypted USB drive with no label, a small stack of cash, and a sealed envelope with her name written in her mother's handwriting. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing an insurance form worth $10 million, and a flash drive taped to the corner labeled Marcus, Final Record. She slid the drive into her laptop, and the screen filled with static before clearing into a video. Her father appeared, sitting in their old kitchen, the same night before he was killed. He looked younger, tired, but still had that quiet authority in his eyes. "If you're watching this," Marcus said, voice low and deliberate, "then I didn't make it." The man who will come for your mother, Ryan Whitaker, is not just a cop. He's the bastard son of the chief. He runs the smuggling pipeline. Naomi's been closing in, and he's panicking. They'll frame her before they ever let her speak. He paused, swallowing hard. The manifests are in her classified drive, but she doesn't know I copied them to that safe. Every weapon they've moved, every dollar, every account. It's all here. Don't trust anyone. Maya, not even the ones who look like friends. If you're smart, you'll run before sunrise. The video ended with him glancing to the side, startled by a sound off camera. Then the image froze. Maya sat motionless for a full minute before whispering. He knew. Tears blurred the screen. She wiped them away and focused, forcing her mind to steady. Then she connected the second USB drive, the one marked with no label. A file list appeared. Purchase orders, customs forms, falsified seizure reports, all signed by Ryan Whitaker. The evidence was overwhelming. She copied the contents to a secure cloud folder, encrypting it with a password only her mother would understand, Omega 7. Outside, in a black van parked across the street, Officer Kyle Dempsey watched through a thermal lens. He saw her silhouette moving from the desk to the window, saw her shoulders shaking. He lifted his radio. She found it. He said quietly, "On the other end." Whitaker's voice growled through static. "Good. Grab the drive and bring her to Warehouse 17. We end this before sunrise." Dempsey hesitated. "She's just a kid. Ryan." The reply came sharp. "She's a witness. You want that debt of yours wiped clean, don't you?" Silence followed, then a clipped, "Understood." Dempsey set the radio down, running his hand through his hair. His reflection in the windshield looked foreign. A man too deep in something he couldn't crawl out of. Back inside. Maya heard a faint sound outside. A car door closing. She turned off the light and slipped the drives into her pocket. Her mind raced through escape plans. Her mother had drilled it into her since childhood. If something feels wrong, trust your gut, not the room. She took the side stairwell, moving quickly but quietly toward the garage, just as she reached for the door handle. Headlights flashed across the driveway. The van rolled closer, engine humming low. She crouched behind the car, holding her breath. The door slid open, and two silhouettes stepped out. Dempsey's voice was low, tense. "Maya Carter, we need to talk." His partner's hand rested on his weapon. "You can make this easy." She didn't answer. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen. With one press, she could send the cloud link to her mother's DNI account. She took a breath and hit send. The screen flashed. Transmission complete. The same instant. The garage lights flicked on. Motion sensor triggered. Dempsey caught sight of her and cursed. "There!" She bolted through the side door, sprinting across the lawn barefoot. The grass was wet, the night air thick with the smell of rain. She reached the back fence and climbed, scraping her hands. Behind her, Dempsey shouted, "Stop! Maya, don't make me!" His words caught in his throat. The girl didn't stop. She dropped to the alley and disappeared into the shadows. Dempsey lowered his weapon, panting. His partner sneered. "You going soft?" Dempsey turned, eyes burning. "You have no idea what we're dealing with." He pulled out his phone, looked at Whitaker's number, then shoved it back in his pocket. For the first time, he wasn't sure whose side he was on. By dawn, Naomi's encrypted satellite log registered a new upload from an unknown user inside the federal holding cell. She opened her watch's concealed screen and saw one line appear. Marcus file uploaded. Verified source, Maya. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Good girl." Then she tore the page from her notebook, scribbled a final code, and folded it twice before slipping it under her mattress. Coordinates that pointed directly to Warehouse 17, that morning. The Atlanta skyline turned pink with sunrise as a van sped through an industrial corridor. Inside, Whitaker barked orders into his phone. She's running. Lock down the exits. If she talks, we all burn. His words were jagged, angry, desperate. He had no idea that every call, every word, every breath of that conversation was already mirrored in a secure federal archive. The invisible eye of Protocol Omega-7 was now wide open and miles away, in a safe room inside the Pentagon. A red light blinked again. General David Harlan, Director of National Intelligence, stepped into the chamber. "Who authorized this feed?" he asked. The technician turned. Pale. "No one." "Sir, it's self-initiated. Carter's Omega signal. It's live." Harlan's expression hardened. "Then we move." Quietly. She's not alone anymore. As sunlight hit the city, Maya crouched beneath an overpass, exhausted but unbroken, clutching the drive close to her chest. The skyline above her shimmered with the illusion of peace. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, and though she didn't know it yet, the evidence she'd sent had already begun to unravel an empire. ChatGPT John Noy. The morning of the federal trial began with a tension so thick that it silenced even the most seasoned journalists. Inside the Northern District of Georgia Federal Courthouse, every breath felt rehearsed, every movement deliberate. The marble floors reflected the weight of the day, and the flags behind the bench hung perfectly still, as though the air itself knew what was coming. Dr. Naomi Elise Carter sat at the defense table, calm and unshaken. Her gray suit was pressed, her hair tied neatly at the back, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Across the aisle sat Sergeant Ryan Whitaker, his jaw tight, hands clasped as if holding his nerves together. Beside him, Officer Kyle Dempsey shifted uneasily, eyes down, the guilt in his posture speaking louder than words. Judge Aisha Rahman entered and took her seat, her presence commanding the room before she spoke. "Court is now in session. Case title, United States versus Ryan Whitaker and Kyle Dempsey." Her voice carried no emotion, only the clarity of justice. Cameras from C-SPAN rolled silently, their red lights blinking as witnesses, agents, and attorneys filled every seat. The prosecutor, Assistant United States Attorney Sarah Brooks, stepped to the podium. "Your Honor, the government calls Dr. Naomi Elise Carter to the stand." Naomi rose, placed one hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. She adjusted the microphone and spoke with measured precision. "I am Deputy Director of National Intelligence for the United States. My duties include oversight of federal counterintelligence operations." The jury shifted in their seats. No one had expected this quiet woman to hold such authority. Sarah Brooks paced gently. "Dr. Carter, please describe what occurred on the night of your arrest." Naomi's eyes did not waver. "I was driving north on Interstate 85 after a classified briefing regarding missing military-grade firearms routed through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. I was stopped by two officers, one of whom I recognized from a previous federal inquiry. Sergeant Ryan Whitaker." She paused, letting the name linger. "He claimed I was impersonating a federal officer. My credentials were genuine, issued by the Department of National Intelligence. My dash cam was recording." Whitaker leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously. But the judge's gavel struck. "You will remain silent until directed." Naomi continued. "Sergeant Whitaker placed a recording device near my seat, one capable of digital manipulation. He later produced an audio file suggesting I made threats to kill him. That audio was fabricated." The prosecutor nodded. "Dr. Carter, did you activate any form of emergency protocol that night?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Protocol Omega-7. It is a classified failsafe used only when a federal agent is unlawfully detained." "And what did it do?" "It transmitted all available recordings to secure government servers in Washington." Sarah Brooks turned toward the evidence screen. "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to introduce Exhibit 1, The original dashcam footage recovered from Dr. Carter's vehicle. Judge Rahman nodded. Proceed. The lights dimmed, and the screen descended from the ceiling. The first image appeared. Rain slashing across the windshield, red and blue lights flashing behind her. The courtroom grew silent as the recording played. Whitaker's voice filled the room. She knows about Warehouse 17. Silence her before Washington finds out. Then Dempsey's voice followed. Weak but clear. Marcus asked too many questions. Same ending. A collective gasp moved through the gallery. Whitaker stood abruptly, shouting, "That's a fake! That's been doctored!" But before he could continue, Judge Rahman's gavel cracked through the noise. "Sit down, Sergeant. You will wait your turn." Whitaker glared at Naomi, his confidence slipping into visible panic. The prosecutor pressed a button. The screen froze on Whitaker's face, clearly visible in the rain. His badge illuminated by the cruiser's lights. "Members of the jury," she said softly. "This footage came directly from a government satellite relay. It has been verified by 3 separate forensic labs. What you are witnessing is truth." She turned. "The government now calls Officer Kyle Dempsey." Dempsey's steps to the witness stand were slow, almost reluctant. His eyes darted to Whitaker, then to the prosecutor. He swore his oath, then sat, his hands trembling. "Officer Dempsey," Sarah Brooks began, "you were present during Dr. Carter's arrest?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Did Dr. Carter ever threaten you or Sergeant Whitaker?" He hesitated. The silence stretched. Then, with a deep breath, he whispered, "No." She didn't. The room shifted, a low murmur spreading through the crowd. "Tell the court what actually happened." Dempsey closed his eyes. "Whitaker ordered me to disable my body camera. He said the arrest was part of something bigger. He told me to frame her, and 3 years ago, he killed her husband, Marcus Carter. I was the driver that night." Naomi's face stayed calm, but a single tear traced down her cheek. Whitaker slammed his hand on the table. "Liar!" he shouted. "You're a coward!" The judge raised her gavel again. "One more outburst, and you'll be removed from this courtroom." Dempsey's voice trembled. He said Marcus had evidence on the smuggling routes. He shot him twice in the chest and told me to drive. He looked down. I never spoke because I was scared. The courtroom erupted into whispers again, but Judge Rahman silenced them. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the government calls General David Harlan, Director of National Intelligence." Gasps rippled across the room as a tall man in uniform stepped forward. The gold stars on his shoulders gleamed under the lights. He saluted the judge, then spoke. "Dr. Carter is one of the most trusted officers in our intelligence community. She was directly overseeing the investigation into domestic arms smuggling involving multiple law enforcement agencies. I can confirm she reported directly to me, and through me, to the President." The words struck like thunder. The courtroom doors burst open as Secret Service agents entered, sealing every exit, reporters whispered, stunned, as the entire atmosphere shifted from a local case to a matter of national security. At that moment, Whitaker panicked. He bolted from his chair, sprinting toward the evidence vault at the side of the courtroom. "Stop him!" someone shouted. Agents drew their weapons. Whitaker kicked open the vault door, grabbed a can of gasoline, and began dousing the shelves of files and hard drives. "You'll never get me!" he screamed, striking a match. Flames erupted. Officers and agents rushed forward. 2 men tackled him to the floor just as the fire spread. The entire scene played out live on C-SPAN, watched by millions across the country. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared, and the chaos of justice unfolded in real time. Naomi stood motionless, her eyes fixed on Whitaker's face as he was dragged away, handcuffed, burned, but alive. Then, through the confusion, a voice came from the courtroom speaker, steady, unmistakable, and powerful. "This is the President of the United States," it said. "Judge Rahman, Proceed without delay. Any further obstruction of this case will be treated as treason." The courtroom fell dead silent. Even the fire alarms seemed to fade under the weight of those words. Judge Rahman turned to the jury. "You have heard the evidence. You have seen the truth. The court will recess for deliberation." 28 minutes later, they returned. The foreperson stood. "We find the defendants guilty on all counts." Naomi exhaled quietly, her eyes closing for just a moment. The world outside that courtroom had just changed forever. Ryan Whitaker's cell door slammed shut with a metallic echo that traveled through every corridor of the federal detention center. The trial was over. The masks were gone. The name that once made officers stand at attention now carried the same weight as any other inmate number. The jury's verdict had left no doubt. Guilty on every count. From murder and obstruction of justice to conspiracy against the United States, Judge Aisha Rahman's words still rang in his head. "You abused the badge, and in doing so, you betrayed the law you swore to uphold." His sentence, life without the possibility of parole, meant the rest of his days would pass behind concrete walls, a place where titles meant nothing and truth had the last word. Whitaker spent the first month in isolation. Angry and unrepentant, he cursed Naomi Carter's name daily, pacing the cold floor of his cell like a caged animal. He wrote appeal letters that no lawyer would file, shouted threats into the night, and called the guards traitors for taking orders from a federal puppet. But as the weeks turned to months, the fire inside him began to dim. The prison yard had its own code, and no one cared who he had been outside those gates. He had crossed too many people, betrayed too many deals, and left too many bodies unaccounted for. Now, the same men he once commanded from behind a badge walked past him with quiet hatred in their eyes. He tried to buy protection, offered favors, even lied about hidden money. But no one believed him. 2 years into his sentence, on a humid morning that smelled of bleach and rust, the guards found him in the shower. 14 stab wounds, no suspects, no witnesses, just another inmate whose power had finally expired. In a quiet office in Washington, Naomi Carter received the news. She didn't flinch. She simply closed the file, took a slow breath, and said, "Justice doesn't need revenge." Her assistant nodded but could see the weight behind her calm. The woman who had stared down the system and survived was not celebrating. She was grieving the idea of what law enforcement was supposed to be, a promise broken by those sworn to protect it. Kyle Dempsey's fate unfolded differently. His confession during the trial had saved him from life imprisonment, but not from his conscience. 10 years in a federal penitentiary for his cooperation. The day he arrived, the warden handed him a new identity packet, one that would follow his release into witness protection. He served his time quietly, never asking for privileges, never raising his voice. In the workshops, he repaired engines and kept to himself, every night. He reread the letter Naomi had written him after the sentencing. "You spoke when silence served you best. That took courage. Don't waste the chance you've earned." When his release came, he took the new name offered to him, moved to a small town in Montana, and took a job fixing trucks. He never spoke of Georgia again. The people who met him there knew him only as a quiet man who worked hard and drank black coffee at dawn. Some nights, though, he would wake in cold sweat, hearing Marcus Carter's voice in his head and seeing Whitaker's gun flash in the dark. The fall of the Atlanta chief of police was the most public and the most disgraceful. When the verdict against Whitaker became national news, reporters turned their cameras toward the man who had protected him. The chief stood before microphones, trying to sound unshaken, but his eyes betrayed panic. Within hours, leaked documents showed that he had signed off on fake evidence transfers and received bribes tied to the smuggling ring. Facing an indictment, he vanished. A week later, A letter surfaced in his office claiming suicide, but the body never appeared. Months later, Interpol found traces of his DNA in Mexico, along with $2 million in unaccounted drug cash. His name was added to the international wanted list, a fugitive from a justice system he once controlled. For the families of the victims tied to the smuggling ring, the reckoning was both closure and heartbreak. In the church where Marcus Carter's funeral had once been held, people gathered again, officers, civilians, journalists, even federal agents who had followed Naomi's case from the beginning. The air carried both grief and pride. Pastor Isaiah Brooks spoke softly from the pulpit. When the truth finally walks into the light, it doesn't ask for applause. It asks for courage. Naomi sat in the front row, her daughter Maya beside her, holding her hand, for the first time since her husband's death. She allowed herself to cry. After the service, Maya stepped outside and faced the cameras. The press had waited for hours, hoping for a quote. Her voice was steady, the same calm strength her mother carried. My father died trying to expose the truth. My mother was almost silenced for doing the same. Today is not about vengeance. It's about accountability. And we're not finished. The clip aired across every major network. And within a week, it sparked a wave of renewed investigations into old police corruption cases nationwide. Meanwhile, Naomi returned to her office in Washington. Her desk, once stacked with intelligence reports, now carried a new set of files marked Carter Doctrine Implementation. She spent her days reviewing oversight plans, drafting reforms, and coordinating with senators determined to fix what the case had exposed. Every reform memo she signed carried a simple handwritten phrase at the bottom: no badge above the law. She didn't talk about Whitaker again. She didn't have to. His name had become a warning. In Atlanta, the precinct that once housed Whitaker's team was shut down. The building, stripped of its seal and emptied of records, stood boarded for a year before the city council voted to turn it into a community justice center. The murals painted on its walls showed not the faces of officers but of citizens, ordinary people who had once feared the very system meant to serve them. A year later, on a quiet afternoon, Naomi received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small photograph of Dempsey working at a garage, his hands stained with oil, his face peaceful. On the back was written, "Still trying to fix things." She smiled faintly and placed it in her drawer beside Marcus's Medal of Honor. The story of Ryan Whitaker's fall became a lecture in police academies, universities, and law schools. It was studied not for the crime, but for the lesson, the fragility of unchecked power, the danger of silence, and the courage it takes to stand alone against a machine built to bury the truth. Naomi's name, once mocked by men who thought her silence was weakness, had become a symbol of strength. In the end, justice didn't roar, it whispered. It whispered through prison bars, through courtroom halls, through the quiet streets of a reformed city. It whispered that every abuse leaves a record, every lie meets its reckoning, and every truth, no matter how buried, eventually finds its voice. And for Naomi Elise Carter, that whisper was enough. The Senate Homeland Security Committee chamber was packed that morning. The kind of packed that only happens when the nation senses a turning point. Every network camera was trained on the oak dais where Dr. Naomi Elise Carter sat beneath the seal of the United States, her posture straight, her expression calm. The case that had begun as a traffic stop on Interstate 85 had now reached the highest level of government. Senators shuffled their papers, aides whispered behind folders, and journalists filled the back rows waiting for the moment when history would shift again. The chairman cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Dr. Carter," he said, "this committee thanks you for your testimony during the investigation. Before we begin, please state your recommendations for national reform." Naomi lifted her notes, though she didn't need them. Her voice carried steady, confident, and clear. The Carter Doctrine rests on three immediate actions. First, every body camera in the nation must be tamper-proof, and any attempt to disable it should result in automatic penalties. Second, all federal credentials must be verifiable within 90 seconds nationwide. Third, all investigations of police misconduct must be reviewed by independent civilian boards, not internal departments. The room fell silent. Her words, simple and deliberate, carried the weight of everything the country had witnessed. Senator Elaine Rutherford from Maine adjusted her glasses. Dr. Carter, what makes you believe these changes will succeed where others have failed? Naomi met her gaze evenly. Because this time, the evidence didn't die in silence. The system we built to record the truth finally spoke, and the entire nation heard it. That cannot be undone. Murmurs spread across the chamber. The Carter Doctrine, as it was already being called by the press, had ignited public demand for real accountability. Lawmakers who once avoided such reform now saw political survival in its passage. A staffer stepped forward with a folder containing the results of the Department of Justice review. Naomi flipped through the pages as she continued. Over 12,000 misconduct complaints have been reopened in the past 6 months. 847 officers have been dismissed or charged. 38 district attorneys are under investigation for evidence suppression. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. And this is only the beginning. The goal is not punishment. It is purification. The badge must mean what it once meant, service, not supremacy. The hearing room erupted in quiet applause. Something rare for a Senate chamber. Judge Aisha Rahman, seated behind the panel as an advisor, nodded in approval. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming. Carter Doctrine passes first Senate hurdle. Accountability becomes law. When the hearing adjourned, Naomi stepped into the marble hallway where cameras and microphones waited. The flashing lights didn't bother her anymore. Dr. Carter, what do you say to critics who call this government overreach? One reporter asked. She stopped, met his eyes, and said simply, Justice doesn't fear scrutiny. Corruption does. The clip would air across every major network within the hour, sparking debates that stretched from newsroom panels to family dinner tables. In the months that followed, the Carter Doctrine spread across all 50 states. Congress voted with an overwhelming majority to enact the National Law Enforcement Accountability and Integrity Act. For the first time in American history, every police department was linked to a federal oversight system that tracked arrests, misconduct complaints, and disciplinary actions in real time. State legislatures scrambled to meet compliance deadlines. Police unions resisted at first, calling it intrusive, but public opinion forced them to adapt. People were tired of headlines that ended in silence. Naomi spent those months traveling constantly, from Washington to Chicago, from Atlanta to Sacramento, meeting with governors, mayors, and police chiefs. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message. Reform isn't a punishment, it's a promise. She met young cadets who told her they joined the force because of her courage, veterans who said the trial restored their faith, and families who said the law gave meaning to the lives that had been lost unjustly. Every encounter reaffirmed what she already knew, that justice, when spoken clearly, heals even the deepest wounds. Meanwhile, the White House issued a proclamation recognizing her leadership. The president invited her to the East Room to sign the final stage of the doctrine into law. Cameras flashed as he handed her the pen. Dr. Carter, he said, this nation owes you more than words. You reminded us that silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. She smiled faintly, replying, I didn't remind them. Sir. The truth did. Across the country, ripple effects followed. Police academies adopted new curricula that required cadets to study the Carter case as a legal precedent in classrooms. The dashcam footage that had once been buried was now mandatory viewing, shown not as humiliation, but as a warning of how easily integrity can be lost. Departments installed body cameras with blockchain security that could not be altered or erased within a year. Reports of falsified evidence dropped by 40% nationwide. Transparency had finally become more than a slogan. It was policy. For Naomi, the transformation was deeply personal. She still lived in the same Buckhead home, though now it served as a quiet refuge rather than a fortress. Her daughter, Maya, graduated from Emory Law at the top of her class, earning a standing ovation during commencement when the dean announced her thesis title, The Silent Shield, Rebuilding Public Trust Through Federal Oversight, the following year. Maya joined the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor specializing in police corruption cases. Naomi often watched her from the public benches, pride filling the spaces where grief once lived. One afternoon, as Naomi left the Capitol after another hearing, a young officer approached her in the corridor. He couldn't have been more than 25. Uniform crisp, badge gleaming. "Ma'am," he said softly, "my father served under Sergeant Whitaker. He was part of that system. I just want you to know, I joined to be part of yours." Naomi placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then make sure it's better than mine. That's how you honor both of us." By the end of the second year, the Carter Doctrine had become the backbone of modern law enforcement reform. Federal grants were tied to compliance, training programs were overseen by civilian boards, and annual transparency reports became a requirement for every police agency. It wasn't perfect, no reform ever was, but the culture was changing. The idea that no one stood above the law had finally found structure. When Naomi returned to Atlanta for the dedication of the new Community Justice Center built on the old precinct grounds, she stood before a crowd of officers, students, and families. The bronze plaque outside the entrance read, "Founded in the spirit of the Carter Doctrine, where silence serves truth, not fear." She looked at the words for a long moment, remembering the night on Interstate 85 when rain and flashing lights had nearly ended her life. Then she looked up at the crowd and said quietly, "We didn't rewrite the law today. We remembered it." Applause rolled across the plaza, rising like a wave for the first time in years. Naomi felt the burden of her past begin to lift. The system that had once tried to destroy her now carried her name in its foundation. She smiled, knowing Marcus would have approved. He had always believed that justice wasn't about winning. It was about returning balance. And as she walked down the courthouse steps under the bright Atlanta sun, the words she had spoken to the Senate echoed in her mind. The badge must mean what it once meant: service, not supremacy, for the first time in a long while. That promise felt real. Freedom Plaza shimmered under the early light, the kind of morning when the air feels new, when the sound of footsteps echoes softly across stone. In the center stood a bronze monument, 12 feet high, cast in stillness but alive with meaning. Dr. Naomi Elise Carter and her late husband, Special Agent Marcus Carter, immortalized in the moment of unity that had defined their lives. His arm rested gently around her shoulders, hers extended forward, holding a folder marked Truth. The inscription below read, "Silence is not surrender. It is strategy." Crowds gathered around, some in uniform, others in plain clothes, their faces a mix of reverence and pride. The ribbon-cutting ceremony marked the official unveiling of the Carter Institute for Criminal Justice, a project that had begun as an idea written in Naomi's old leather notebook the day after the trial. Now, that dream had become a place, a living institution dedicated to training officers, prosecutors, and investigators in integrity and transparency. Naomi stood a few steps from the statue, dressed in a deep navy suit, her hair streaked with silver. She looked out at the sea of faces, cadets, survivors of misconduct, families who had lost loved ones, senators, and journalists. The United States flag rippled in the soft wind behind her as she began to speak. 3 years ago, this city was a battlefield of truth. We were told to be quiet, to wait, to obey. But silence can do more than hide fear. It can sharpen it into purpose. This institute isn't built on my name. It's built on what truth costs and what courage restores. Her words carried across the plaza, clear and measured. Every pause drew the crowd closer. My husband gave his life believing that justice was possible, even when it seemed impossible. We stand here not because I survived, but because he refused to stay silent. Applause rippled through the air, quiet at first, then building into a steady wave. In the front row sat Maya Carter, now a federal prosecutor in the Department of Justice, her badge pinned neatly beside her lapel. She wiped a tear discreetly, smiling with pride, to her. This moment wasn't just her mother's victory, it was her father's vindication. Beside her sat Judge Aisha Rahman, the same woman who had presided over Whitaker's trial, and General David Harlan, representing the Department of National Intelligence. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The law, the military, and intelligence standing side by side, united under one banner, accountability, inside the Institute's glass-walled lobby. The first class of recruits stood at attention, waiting for the official opening. Behind them stretched corridors filled with digital exhibits, the original Omega-7 dashcam footage, forensic reports, and the signed documents of the Carter Doctrine. Every element told a story, not of vengeance, but of structure built from pain. Naomi stepped inside after the ceremony, walking slowly down the hall as visitors followed behind her. Each screen flickered with images from that stormy night, the rain, the flashing lights, the calm voice that refused to bend. The narration, recorded in Naomi's own tone, said softly, "Justice is not loud, it whispers, and you must be still enough to hear it." She paused at the training amphitheater, where Maya was leading a seminar for young prosecutors. On the large screen, the dashcam video played again. Stopping at the moment Whitaker's voice declared, "She knows about Warehouse 17. Maya turned to her students. "This," she said, "is what happens when power forgets accountability. This is why we document everything, why we question everything, and why we never ever let fear dictate the truth." The students listened intently, some taking notes, others visibly moved. Naomi stood quietly at the back, proud yet solemn. She had seen every failure this system could offer, and now she was watching its rebirth through the very people who would lead it next. As evening fell, Naomi left the Institute and walked to Freedom Plaza. The crowd had gone, but the bronze statue remained surrounded by fresh flowers, ribbons, and handwritten notes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single white rose, the same kind she had placed on Marcus's grave each year, kneeling before the base of the statue. She whispered, "You were right, Marcus. They can't kill hope. They only make it louder." The words left her lips softly, carried away by a light breeze that brushed her cheek like a reply. Behind her, the city hummed with new life. Police sirens sounded in the distance, not as symbols of fear, but of order restored. Screens on nearby buildings displayed headlines from across the country. Carter Institute graduates first class of ethical officers. Body cam compliance hits, 99% nationwide. Civilian review boards overturned 200 corrupt cases. The world was still imperfect, still struggling, but it was moving forward. And for Naomi, That was enough. Later that night, she sat in her office overlooking the illuminated plaza. The window reflected both the statue and her own tired reflection. On her desk rested a letter from the president inviting her to join a new federal commission on justice reform. She smiled faintly and set it aside. Her work wasn't about titles anymore. It was about legacy. The Carter Institute now trained more than 50,000 officers annually. Teaching that silence, when guided by purpose, could expose louder truths than any shout ever could. The Omega-7 case had become mandatory training material for every police academy in the nation, and her name had become shorthand for integrity. But for Naomi, the measure of success wasn't how many people remembered her. It was how few repeated the same mistakes. She opened the drawer of her desk and took out her old notebook, the one she'd written in during her trial. The pages were yellowed, but the last entry still felt alive. Justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins when the cameras turn off. She smiled at the memory and added one final note in neat, careful handwriting. We didn't win. We evolved. Then she closed the book and locked it away. Outside, a light rain began to fall, soft and cleansing. The droplets shimmered on the bronze figures in the plaza, tracing paths down their faces like tears. The floodlights turned the statue into something almost human, and for a moment, it seemed as if Marcus himself stood there watching her. Naomi rose from her chair, turned off the lights, and whispered to the darkness, "Rest now. I'll carry it from here." As she walked out of the building, the sound of her heels echoed against the marble floor, a steady rhythm, confident and calm. Behind her, the Institute's motto glowed above the door in silver letters, "For every voice once silenced, we speak." The screen of the world faded to black, replaced by white text, for everyone mocked for their skin, gender, or roots, who chose silence so the truth could scream. And in that final quiet, the story of Dr. Naomi Elise Carter, her courage, her restraint, her faith in justice, became not just history, but a promise that truth, once spoken, never dies. Thank you for watching and standing with stories that speak truth to power. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who still believes in justice, because your voice keeps the truth alive.